Hi, this is Professor Rujo Moreno with an overview of Learning Objective 4 in Chapter 1. The planning environment really is dominated around three major players: the government and government actions, businesses and business actions, and consumers and consumer tastes and desires, and so forth and so on. In the book, you'll see Exhibit 1.6, which indicates that all of them are interconnected. Consumers are, in essence, the source of labor for businesses, right? So businesses will pay the labor. Consumers will then use that money to buy things from businesses. Uh, in that entire scheme of things, the government is benefiting by collecting taxes on various sales that are made or income that's being earned and taxed. So, in essence, everything is sort of um, melded together and we are affected by each other. So, things that the government might do, things that businesses might do, things that other consumers might say or do will have an overall impact on how the economy is doing. Okay. So, that brings us to a very important point. The economy is, in essence, how we make our living. Things that you may study in college oftentimes lead to jobs and economic opportunities. Sometimes it doesn't. You'll know the difference because you'll have some folks that have degrees and making lots of money with lots of different opportunities for promotion and expansion, and others that might seem to kind of hit a dead end and not make as much leeway as they thought. Ultimately, it depends on the economy, both in a few ways. One, the economy in which you are used to growing up. So you guys are fortunate enough, most of you are younger, that the economy over the last 20 years has more or less been good, much better than bad. It's had its bad points in time, but overall it's been relatively good. But if you go back generations, particularly much older folks who might have had experience of living through the Great Depression years, their view of the economy wasn't so good. And so, what I mean by this is your outlook on things is really dependent too on when you were born and what your first impressions are of the economy. If you were born when things are going um, very well and things are expanding and looking up um, and positive, you'll have a pretty positive view of how an economy might work. But there are folks who remember and they were born and grew up during times when the economy was really bad, and they don't necessarily trust that things are always going to be great. And that's going to make a big difference both in for financial planning specifically, because how you see things is going to affect how you spend and how you save and invest. So, very interesting types of things going on with the view of the economy, depending on what you remember. But in essence, economies go in cycles. Our economy has, four basic cycles, as you see here. When the economy is growing, and when we mean by growing, we're talking about creating more goods and services. That's how we measure GDP, simply by the value of the amount of goods and services we are creating in the economy in a period of time. So, creating more and more goods and services is really what marks an expansion. And expansions, as you know, provide lots of opportunities for jobs, oftentimes promotional opportunities, higher wages. People are feeling good in an expansion, so they're going to go out and buy lots of stuff, including big stuff like houses, cars, appliances, other very, very large things. Of course, it is a cycle. So at some point in time, it will peak and the economy will hit sort of a ceiling of sorts. Something will happen that'll stop this expansion from happening. At what point we'll see what we consider a downward trend in the economy, and that really means less goods and services being produced. We call that a contraction or an economic recession. If it lasts more than 6 months, it's a recession. And a contraction, again, is a normal part of the cycle. It simply means that fewer goods and services are being produced and sold. Uh, Thus, there are less opportunities for work for some people and less growth overall. It's during that contraction, particularly during a recessionary period, where people feel, oh, I might lose my job because my neighbor just lost his job, and they kind of cut back on things, and that cutting back, of course, simply adds to the contraction, simply adds to the reduction of goods and services in the economy. And again, that will stop at some point. It'll bottom out at a point we call a trough. That's basically when things start turning around. People are starting to spend a little bit more money. There's more demand for goods and services, and so more are being produced. As more things are being produced, there are more opportunities for jobs, more income being earned, more spending, and we go back on the expansion cycle. So it simply flows. We're very, very fortunate in our the last 20 to 40-year period of time when economic expansions have been lasting longer and longer periods of 6 to 10 years in length. And contractions have been very short. They've been sharp, but they've been very short, usually lasting 6 to 8 months in length on average. So we've been very, very fortunate to have this type of very long period of expansion, very short periods of contraction. Way back prior to um, FDR and World War II, et cetera, these cycles were very short. Expansions were only 3 or 4 years in length. Contractions were much longer. Recessions were 1 to 2 years in length. So the fact that we're getting longer expansions and shorter recessions can be looked at as a good thing. The book also introduces you to something that's very important called inflation. Inflation really looks at the trend of prices over time. And so if you bought a bottled water for $1, and you buy it again next year, and it's $1, and you buy it again the year after that, it's $1. There's no inflation per se because it's stable prices, stable prices. However, if you buy a bottle of water for $1, but next year when you buy it, it's $1.10, and then the following year you buy it, it's $1.20. So then we've had inflation, increases in prices for the same items that we buy today. We're not getting a better item. We're not getting more of the item. We're buying the same item, but we need to use more of our money to buy the same item. And that's basically what inflation is about. And that affects our purchasing power. There's another term in this book as well. That affects our purchasing power because if you have to give more money up to buy the same thing, well, then your dollar buys less than it did previously. And so this is a very, very important part of life, because when you look at things like retirement, for example, that may be for some of us only 10 or 15 years away. For some of us, it might be 30, 40, 50 years away. Regardless how long away it is, prices are going to change. And so how much money do we need to buy various things is going to change over time. And likely it's going to go higher over time. And that's really what inflation is about, looking at how those prices have changed over a period of time. They usually increase, which is why we call it inflation. If the levels of prices have decreased over time, that's simply what we call deflation. But we are more worried about inflation when it comes to financial planning. How we measure inflation is what the CPI is about. So Consumer Price Index is a government index of prices, and they look at hundreds and hundreds of items that we buy on a regular basis and measure them over time to calculate, on average, how much we are spending for the same things over a long period of time. And that's how they measure inflation, through the CPI. Okay. That's important because you need to have more money than inflation. So if you know, for example, rent is going to go from $1,000 a month today, and say 10 years from now, it's going to be $2,000. Well, you're going to need twice as much money to rent your apartment. And so you have to plan for that. Part of financial planning is planning for those types of things. And that's what's really important to know.